At Tropic Ocean Airways, we pride ourselves on safety, customer service, and corporate responsibility. We look forward to introducing Tropic Ocean Airways to your community, providing greater accessibility and becoming the preferred choice for air travel in your region.
So I came across that video just recently as I was researching for this conversation, and it's beautifully done. You know, nothing quite like seeing a seaplane on the big whip air floats, you know, getting out there into the Caribbean. I'd love to start, really, if I could just know a little bit more about you, Rob Ceravolo. Can you give us a little bit of how you came to be here?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, that video, you know, the genesis of that video was because, you know, what we do is we kind of don't look for areas that already operate seaplanes. We try to find areas that would benefit from seaplanes, related to either urban mobility or an archipelago. And a lot of the conversations we were having with governments was, well, these things are really loud. So we had to show a video of them landing, you know, next to, and then another one is, well, how do you land next to a boat? That sounds dangerous, you know? So we showed the airplane maneuvering around a dock. So it's amazing what misperceptions there are about amphibious and seaplanes, and we can talk about that later. But yeah, for me, so I like you were talking about it before we got on here, you know, I was a big aviation nerd growing up. So my dad was actually an AME here in Fort Lauderdale for years. Yeah, he was off of Commercial Boulevard. He had passed away in 2003, but I grew up, you know, he came over from Italy in the 1960s, and he was a teenager during World War II. His town was, you know, overrun by the fascists and the Nazis, and the American military liberated his town. So he brought me up to, you know, love aviation, because he, you know, his favorite story when he was a kid was the American bombers flying over his head on top of a mountain in Italy, you know? Wow. So he got into private aviation. And he also brought me up to just love the American military. So I had this desire ever since I was a little kid to, you know, go fly fighters. And in fact, I mean, when my friends were playing Little League, I was over at Fort Lauderdale Executive watching airplanes and hanging out with the line guys. I remember being given I had to go do like community service. So I went and volunteered my time at the airport. You know, like I just loved that's just where I spent my time when I was a kid. So after I graduated college, actually going back a little bit, I was going to join the Air Force, and then I'm sure you've seen this movie, Top Gun.
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
you've seen it.
Maybe.
Twice, right?
Might have heard of it. I don't know if anyone
indie film, you know. So I saw that in 1986, and I said, man, you could land these airplanes on boats. That's the coolest thing ever. So I really wanted to be a Navy fighter pilot. So when I graduated college, after a couple of years, I actually flew civilian for a couple of years, built some time when I was 21, 22, because I had some family issues. I couldn't join the military right away. And then I joined, actually was sworn in a month to the day before September 11th. Wow. So yeah, so it was a very impactful day for me. But, I went off to, flight school, flew the F-14 Tomcat. Then I transitioned and flew the F-18 Super Hornet. And, I know there's a bunch of pilots in the crowd. The difference for me is like the F-18 Super Hornet is like driving a Tesla, where you have, all the whiz bang, beautiful systems. The thing drives itself. I mean, the Super Hornet's not a joy to fly. It's a joy to employ weapons, with helmet mounted sight and everything else. The F-14, the F-14 was like driving an old Corvette that leaked oil everywhere, and it was just loud and it was fun to fly. And then from there, I transitioned to the F-5N, the Tiger II. And I went to the squadron down in Key West, and I simulated bad guys. I was an adversary role. And that airplane, that was a pilot's airplane, because there was no hydraulic boost, nothing. I mean, you're flying, it's hydraulics, but you're not getting any digital flight control boost or anything like that. So it brings you back to your roots. And it's amazing. Like you think you're really good. Yeah, stick and rudder. You think you're really good flying the Tomcat and the Super Hornet, and you get in the F5, and you just don't know what you don't know. So it comes back to, feeling the buffet of the airplane and getting that plane with little skinny wings back to 100 knots. I mean, it's just the most amazing, for me, the most amazing duty station ever. And then I went through Top Gun in 2009. And around the same time, I was reading a book called Screw It, Let's Do It with Richard Branson. And I'd always wanted to start great book, right? So I always wanted to start an aviation company when I retired. And that book kind of triggered me to say, you know what? I'm going to get out of the end of my 10-year commitment. I'm going to become a reservist, and I'm going to start a company. So I went and got my seaplane rating in Jack Brown's, if you're familiar, in Central Florida. It's great.
Love Jack Brown's.
Great school. Yeah, great. We love the Brown family. We've known them for years. In fact, Chuck Brown was one of our one of our check airmen, and I met Nick Veltri, who was my seaplane instructor. And I'd come from, flying F5s the day before. I'm used to wearing a flight suit and boots. And he's like, hey, take your shoes off and let's go flying. And we flew around barefoot in a Cub, at 60 knots. And I was like, okay, you got me. This is the best thing ever. So I said, let's keep in touch. And he was such a great instructor. We were talking about instructors before. He's an amazing instructor, really, really great to work with. And I said, let's keep in touch. I'll probably start a company in a couple of years. And I called him like 4 or 5 months later. I was like, how quickly can you move to Key West? And at that point, I bought, you're familiar, I bought a 1976 206. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I sold my house. I sold my car, my motorcycle. I remember at one point, we were still a year and a half away from getting a license at the 135. And I even sold a kayak to pay for a part in the airplane. And we ended up, yeah, good trade, right? And I rode a bicycle for 2 years trying to get the company off the ground. I was broke. And but we were successful in it, and we took that airplane, and we kind of took the Navy mentality and applied it to civilian, which is that standardization, the training, the way you approach flying is not just about being a good stick. It's about all encompassing how you run a cockpit and things like that.
Absolutely.
And we developed this company. We attracted some investors in 2014. We partnered with Textron and Whip Air to move to the Caravan EX, and the rest is history. We grew the company from that one little 206 when we launched in 2011 to, 13 airplanes. And pre-COVID numbers in 2019, we flew 45,000 people, in 8 countries. So we've grown pretty rapidly, and we kept it as 5-star reviews, no incidents and accidents. It's a good story. And I think it's because we've been very, very successful in building the right team. We got a great group of people on board right now. So
that's wonderful. It really is all about your crew, right? And that
yeah, 100%.
From your time serving in the military, your civilian time, it really is all about your crew. You just touched on so many things. You really got to go back. And I mean, I love you did it. You screw it, let's do it. You started your company and traded in the kayak for it. Went the whole way. So many things to touch on there. First of all, the last number you gave us, 45,000 passengers. In those caravans. Those caravans, if I'm correct, carry like 8 to 10 passengers on average?
Yeah. So we have a mix of amphibious, which we fly 8 passengers, and then the wheeled, which we fly 9, and everything's flown with a 2-pilot crew. Yeah.
So that's a lot of sorties. That's a lot of flights to get to 45,000 people in a year. My gosh, you guys have been incredibly busy, and congratulations on your growth and your success there.
Thank you.
But just to go back a little bit further, the F-14, talk about Top Gun. Like, you saw the poster and you put yourself in that poster, right?
No, it's great. You show up, you date your instructor, you play volleyball. It's what? No. Yeah, I'll tell you.
Sunglasses right now.
Yeah, so I've got them. Actually, I've got my little Ray-Bans. No, so Top Gun was great. So I think it's even more importantly, the better stories leading up to Top Gun. So you're a Tomcat pilot, and then you go to the Super Hornet. You've flown the 2 best jets in the Navy, in the U.S. military's inventory, in my opinion. And then you get to this F5, and they're prepping you for Top Gun to be an adversary pilot instructor in an F5 in an old airplane. And you're flying this old 1970s, 1960s technology airplane against, I fought F-22s, F-15s, and
wow.
You just realize nothing. Like, you think you're, and I've had this conversation with young pilots where, hey, I've got 1,500 hours. I know everything I need to know. I'm like, absolutely nothing. And the squadron, VFC 111 in Key West, preparing you for Top Gun really puts you in your place, and you relearn how to learn, if that makes sense. Like,
I believe
the
it.
debrief. I mean, you fail. It's because I became an instructor when I came back to the squadron. They'll fail you 6 times per check ride. 6 times. Can you imagine failing a check ride 6 times in a row? That's part of the plan. Yeah, it sucks when you're on the backside of it, but when you're an instructor, you're working with the other guys. You're like, okay, he needs to fail one more time because he's just not getting it yet. And it's part of the building you to the point where you're just really good at your job when they send you to Top Gun. And Top Gun was challenging. It's long days. I mean, 3 o'clock in the morning, you're prepping briefs. You're flying twice. But the prep going to it, to me, was more challenging than Top Gun itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think the key thing you got there was it's a license to learn, right? And I say that over and over again. We get a private pilot, you get that best of class private pilot that finished in 45, 50 hours, and they feel like $1 million. Yeah. And then time to start the instrument, and you just shrink into this little thing like, oh, I don't really know anything, right? You get your commercial license, your 250-hour pilot, And then you start doing your CFI, and man, you gotta learn everything again, then how to teach it. And it just goes on and on. All right, you're 1,500 hours. Now you get to go and do 737, A320 type rating, and they're going to throw a stack of books at you, and you got to learn it all over again at a different level. The studying never truly stops. And, you know, I get to see students on their first day of flight school, before they've actually gotten into an airplane in many cases. And I always recommend a discovery flight first. That, you know, it's trying to get that across, that we're not just here to put you in, you're not going to burn gas for hours, and no one's going to hand you a certificate, right? You got to put in the books. I think our rule of thumb is 3 to 4 hours for every hour of flying. Right. I don't know if you found the same. I mean, you know, when you're in the service, your life is just 100%.
Oh yeah. No, you fly 45 minutes and you've got hours of prep for a 45-minute flight. Yeah, hours. And I'm sure you guys do this too. And I think this is where we miss it sometimes at civilian flight schools, is that, to me, the debrief is more important than the flight. Like, and it comes down to the instructor. So, you know, I would come back from a flight and I would have 2 pages of notes on a knee board, you know, and I remember talking to some instructors in my company early on, you know, because we developed in-house instructors here, and they're like, well, you can't take notes while you're flying. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I was upside down in a dogfight taking notes. Like, if I could come back with 2 pages of notes, because the debrief is the most important part, you know, to be able to sit down in a 1G environment and talk about it, you know, and then look at the notes and say, you know, you think that crosswind landing was great, but guess what? You know, you were actually a little off by 10 degrees. And there's just so much value to that, you know, and I think that's where we miss sometimes. Yeah.
And a lot of people push back on the ground time, right? The ground time is crucial. It's the foundation. Every minute, every hour you spend on the ground will make your hour in the flight so much more fulfilling, so much better, and so much more useful. And again, it's a different dynamic in the civilian world, where you are paying for the instructor's time and the aircraft time, of course, versus being paid to fly, right? But it's also much more demanding, I think, on the military side. I mean, they're both demanding in their own ways.
Yeah, it is, and I think there's ways to offset the cost, right? And I'm just saying internally, like, you know, I know you guys have simulators. There's always a debate about, well, simulators not flying. I'm like, I get it. But simulators are great for teaching checklists, for teaching CRM, right? For teaching how to manage a cockpit, for running emergency scenarios. So when you get to the airplane, you could focus on the stuff that you have to do in the airplane. And then the debrief point too, I mean, yeah, you're paying for the ground time, but I think it's up to the CFI. The CFI has a responsibility to give that student at least some of his or her time to talk about what just happened. You know, and I think where, you know, from talking to some young pilots, some instructors were in such a rush, obviously pre-COVID, were in such a rush to get to 1,500 hours that they would blow through the debrief so they could go do another flight. And I think that's where you kind of are missing the opportunity to really learn something, you know?
You're absolutely right. And the whole environment has changed, right? And we're going to get into it a little bit later in the conversation. But first, let's just take a minute for everyone that's with us in the Zoom. Please use the chat box, right? We want to hear questions from you. And even before that, I'd love to know where everyone's from. One of the things I've gotten to learn over doing these interviews over the last 6 months is that we have guests from everywhere, right? From India, from Turkey, from South America. So just really quickly in the chat, if you're watching us on Facebook Live, let us know where you're from, right? Let us know where you're from. And that might impact some of the questions that we filter and kind of go through. So yeah, we're already posting there. So please let us know where you're from. And of course, send us some questions so that we can visit them. But you're absolutely right. We have a lot of instructors on. I know for a fact, the guy that just popped up on video, Lorcan, I know he's an instructor. Hey, but that's great advice for instructors. That ground time instruction is really a big feedback loop, right? It's the students giving their instructor mostly nonverbal feedback, right? The way they're holding the stick, the way they're performing in the aircraft, the radio communications. And then of course it's on the instructor to give back verbal feedback and make those adjustments. Pull up, slow down, try this, do that. And so it's a continuous feedback cycle. And the better that feedback loop is, the smoother, the quicker it is in the cockpit and on the ground, the better everyone's going to progress. And when that feedback cycle breaks down, that's when you have troubles in flight training.
Yep. No, absolutely.
So you were, you're flying in the Navy. You were an instructor adversarial role. Did that ever translate into actual instruction in the civilian world?
So other than inside my own company, where I used to do a lot of the instruction early on, Now we have a great, training department and everything else. But yeah, so I think, and then that's really what we try to do is we try to model the way the Navy trains and apply that here. So grading, we talk about hours, right? So for me, the common misconception is the more hours you have, the better you are, right? And I would argue that's completely incorrect. Hours builds experience, and it depends on what you have within those hours. So the Navy gets you from zero, and in 300 hours, you're landing a jet on the back of a boat, right? So at 300 hours, right? And then going into combat at 350 hours. So so what we did is we created this program. We got the FAA to approve a right seat program back in 2013, so that we could log time legally in a single pilot airplane. As you know, unless the op specs say so, you cannot log time in a Caravan in the right seat, right? Some people do it, whatever, it's illegal. So we got that FAA approval back in 2013, and we've been able to develop pilots over time from the ground up. So majority of our pilots, including our chief pilot, who's fantastic, showed up here with 5 hours of seaplane time. And I remember back in 2017 discussing this with the head of training at the time. And I said, how many hours, seaplane hours, do we want before we upgrade somebody? They said 500. I go, why? Nobody can answer the question, right? So I said, okay, what if I jumped in the 206 and I flew around in circles for 500 hours? Does that make me an upgradable captain? Well, no, it doesn't. I said, so let's break those hours down. It's seaplane landings, is it not? It's not just seaplane landings here. It's seaplane landings in other areas where you might get a crosswind. It's all these different things that make up a captain. It's how do you handle a cockpit, CRM, everything else. So we created this training program to develop somebody. And that's what the Navy does. You're always being developed throughout your entire career. You're always learning, and getting moved from level to level to level. And that's what we did. So that's what we did in our company. You asked a question. We took that Navy mentality, the level mentality, and we created a training program here. It's been super successful.
It has to be. I mean, that's how you keep safety strong. We've, there's in the regular commercial civilian world, there's about 50 hours of time that has to be done prior to instrument or immediately after instrument. And it ends up being between 70 and 100 hours of just cross countries. And back in the day, it was, here's the keys, go burn some gas. We'll see you in a couple of months. And we flipped that. I'd say about 5 years ago, we formalized it into a time building course where there's missions, destinations, and each one takes you further out, increasing your competency, so that when you do get around to solo cross country, it's like you're rock solid. And it's Florida weather, right? So we want to make sure that everyone's a really strong pilot because those first solos are really crucial.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I think too. I mean, it's funny. You could teach anybody to fly straight and level, right? Monkey can fly straight and level. You could teach most people how to land an airplane. What happens when you get a bird strike? What happens when your oil temp's high? And I think that's right. I mean, and that's where I think, training needs to focus is those things that were really, the professionalism in how you run a cockpit during those scenarios really comes out. And, odds are you'll probably never see it in your career, but when you hit a bunch of goose in New York City and you could land in the Hudson, it's because you've been developed over time to be able to handle that. And the systems. So it's systems knowledge, it's emergency procedures knowledge, I still know to this day, I could spit out the out of control boldface for an F5, and I've been flying an F5 since 2014. Stick forward, airline or neutral. I won't waste the rest of it, but because it was ingrained in your head, and I think that's where, young pilots need to focus on more of the systems knowledge, emergency procedures, standardizing how you talk on the radio. This is something I wasn't taught, right? When I got my private, you always have to think about what you're going to say next. Top Gun, we were talking about it earlier. You get points taken off. You get hit if you say the wrong thing on the radio, because they don't want you to think about. We don't want you to spend a little right. Yeah, standardize your radio calls so you can think about the flight, not the radio calls.
So this is something I get pushed back all the time, right? So there's really only 3 ground schools that are required for your typical civilian pilot. A private pilot, an instrument, and a commercial. And, there's no shortage of self-study courses out there, right? Somebody can download a Shepherd Air and pass the tests, right? But that doesn't mean you know the knowledge. You don't know the theory, right? So we started with a basic 40-hour ground, and now that's stretched out to 60 hours. And in those 60 hours, I always say that's really just an introduction, right? Like we spend one session on weather and one session on weather services. People get PhDs in meteorology, right? There's no way that we can explain to you everything about weather in these couple of hours. So you really have to go above and beyond. And when it comes to phraseology, we added something that I'm not aware of any other schools that do it. We have an ATC communications class. It used to be called phraseology, but ATC communications class, where it's it used to be 20, it's 12 hours now, and we just go through that, talking on the radio. What do you do in case of this, proper ways to talk about it. And North Perry Airport, for those of you that landed at North Perry Airport, can be confusing. There's 0, 1 right and 1, 0 right. So, I mean, I got confused, right? So it's very important. And I just see people's confidence jump through the roof after that class. And we tie it with a tour to the tower. Of course, post-COVID, we haven't been able to do that tour of the tower. But I think that was a mental adjustment that most people didn't realize until they got there, that this is a person just like me, wearing a lanyard, sitting in the tower that I'm talking to, they're wearing shorts, they go have lunch just like me. And they're great guys, especially here in North Perry, we keep them busy. So that being in the tower, meeting air traffic controllers, getting that phraseology, it is a big one, especially if English is not your first language, which we're in South Florida. As I mentioned earlier, we've got guests from around the world joining us on today's call. It's so critical to be confident in your voice as a pilot. I have a friend that says there's no such thing as a quiet pilot, right? You're always talking, you're always reporting what you're doing, where you're going, what's going on. So it's definitely a crucial skill.
Yeah, it is. I'm glad you guys are doing that. I think the understanding how it all comes together is something that is a great focus. So even in our company, we have a maintenance department, we have a sales department, we have a customer service department, we have a cargo department, we have all these other departments that support that pilot. So part of our in-dock training is they get to meet the people and talk to the directors of those departments, and the directors of departments get to tell them how it all comes together. And our pilots learn the company SOP, not just the pilot SOP, so that they have a better understanding. And we even encourage our young SICs to go sit dispatch, to sit on the other side of that, so that they can work in dispatch and learn how it all comes together. And again, it makes you a more well-rounded professional. You really understand what's happening in your operation.
I fully agree. That makes a lot of sense. I'd like to take a step back here, because you mentioned Jack Brown's, and Jack Brown had a special place in my heart because I got my seaplane rating there. Maybe 6 years ago. I got it with my dad, right? Like my dad is Mr. Wayman. I'm Wayman, second generation, right? And my father's been flying seaplanes. I don't know, probably a good 40 years. He was an Amazon bush pilot, so he got a seaplane legs down there flying on the Amazon.
Great.
And so just for fun, we did a father-son trip and went to Jack Brown's. And you're right. There's nothing like flying a Cub, no radios at 500 feet, right?
Flying.
And I swear it is part of it's got to be part of the curriculum to take your shoes off and put your feet in the water after the second flight.
Yes. Look out for alligators because they're everywhere, right? I don't know if you guys did like the alligator search, so Nick had was like landing next to alligators and stuff. But yeah, and it's a great family up there. Ben Ships recently took it over, and he's doing a great job up there. And his son-in-law of John Brown, and again, a family-run flight school up there that is still looks at it in terms of like how to standardize seaplane operations and stuff. So we work closely with them. If they know that if somebody's coming to us that's going there to get a seaplane rating, that's interviewing for a job, they'll usually have them fly with Chuck. We call it the Chuck ride, not the check ride, and he's a great guy, and they put him through the paces a little bit more and talk a little bit about, flying amphibious operations and stuff like that. So it's good. Yeah.
Just John Brown, because last time when I was there with John Brown 5 years ago, he was trying to figure out what the next step is. So I'm glad that Ben was able to take it over and kind of keep the whole thing going. And I recommend that for anyone, whether they're flying with you or just for themselves, getting a seaplane rating, whether it's here or in Oregon or in Alaska. It gets you out of that straight level, right? I can say the same thing for tailwheel or aerobatic flying. Take that opportunity. When I see a resume, and we're going to talk about careers, and that's what's on everyone's mind right now. But when I see a resume that comes across my desk that has a tailwheel or a seaplane pilot's rating or something like that, I'm like, okay, this is not just a pilot. This is an aviator.
Right.
This is someone that's really taking the extra.
Aerobatics too. We've been, pre-COVID, we were looking at adding like a small warbird here, so we can, and obviously COVID impacted that a little bit, but I'm still looking at them. And so we could do just, out of control flight training, for example, because I think it's an important skill. Put somebody upside down under a hood and see if they could right side the airplane. And I think it's an important skill. There's been plenty of accidents, even in Airbuses, as where somebody couldn't recognize a stall or didn't recognize what was happening with the jet. It's important. Yeah.
I've had the opportunity to do a little bit. I was in an extra 300 out in Vegas last year. And you always talk about the edge, right? And you kind of stay away from the edge. That's the edge of the envelope, right? But until you cross the edge,
right?
You're like, oh, okay.
How do you know where it is unless you hit it? You know, like
that was it back there.
yeah. One of my old skippers, actually, commanding officer down in VFC 111, used to say that. He's like, you know, on a solo flight, he said, go out there. And he goes, push it. He goes, how are you going to know where it is if you don't find it first? And he actually, funny enough, I hired him when we did, when the pilot shortage hit back in 2016. We hired him to be an interim chief pilot for us to get that training program on track. Nice. And it was great to bring that kind of, skill set on board. But yeah, he used to say that all the time. Go find the envelope.
It's so important. And the acrobatic flying, it's, after you do your instrument rating, it's all about being straight and level and not having too many deviations and all these kind of things. There's something nice about just throwing it out the window and see how many hour rolls you can do and that kind of thing.
It's funny. There's obviously a debate now, right, about what the future holds. We were talking about it before for aviators, right, for pilots. And there's obviously a big move towards systems management. I just had my buddies who are still in the Navy are telling me about, when we transitioned to the Super Hornet could land on a carrier automatically.
Wow.
I never used it. I was like that. Oh, I'm old school. I'm going to hand fly this thing in the carrier. I was like, a jackass about it. And now they're really moving towards maybe doing away with massive carrier training, because they're like, that training time, now that the ACLS program is working, so perfectly, that training time to land on a carrier we could spend on combat, right? And shift the training, right? The more efficient. That being said, in my opinion, I still think, the stick and rudder skills are important when the systems fail. Or, look at the Sully example, look at the Airbus example, look at the Colgan example, right? Understanding what your aircraft is doing. Even when the 737 MAX example, when the systems aren't working for you, understanding what's happening in your aircraft. I think the future of aviation training should still have that balance. I still think if somebody's going to become a pilot, learn on a Cub and then transition to G1000, because we've had young pilots who come here who can fly the G1000, but when you cover up certain things, they're like, I don't know how to use the round dial, So I think it's a balance. It's important to have that balance.
Yeah, we've always had a mixed fleet for that reason. We have the G1000, and I love to fly it. It's a wonderful tool with the autopilot and all that good stuff.
Great.
But the round gauges, they keep you more on top of it, and they give you a broader ability to fly, a wide variety of aircraft. I mean, in the U.S., most commercial aircraft have already transitioned to glass screens. But if you're flying in the Caribbean, if you're flying in South America, or really in many parts around the world, you are flying round dials. So it's an important skill to have. And now we're going hybrid. So now we've got these, older aircraft completely overhauled top to bottom with little G5 screens in it. So you have a mini G1000. I feel like it's the best of both worlds. Right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is. I think it's important. I always say, even people who don't know how to navigate around South Florida anymore because they always use their iPhone or a GPS,
Sure.
Like you still have to have that skill set. Like the GPS, the systems, all those are supplements to your basic knowledge, right? To your basic knowledge of how to navigate and things like that. So.
And there's over-reliance. I mean, so at the airlines, they talk about over-reliance on automation. At the ab initio level, we talk about an over-reliance on additional information.
Mm-hmm.
My sister-in-law is going to kill me when she sees this, that she was flying the G1000 with a Garmin 696 at the time and her iPad when they just came out. I'm like, okay, you've got 3 GPSs going on, right? That's a lot of information overload. Like, you need to look outside.
I remember when we started with just the 206, we were a VFR operation. One of our first pilots, I remember we had a little handheld Garmin, the suction cup on the mount, right? And he's like, the handheld's not working. I can't fly to Bimini. And I look outside, there's not a cloud in the sky. And Nick and I are laughing. I'm like, look, just take off, go 130 for about 50 miles, you'll hit it. And you can't miss it. It's an island, And it's just like getting back to that skill set. It's important to be able to have that backup. Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing to have the technology. We joke all the time. When I learned how to fly, there was no GPSs. Everyone would get lost on their first cross country.
I got lost. Yeah. I got lost over Sarasota. I remember because there was cloud cover. I was like, I'm scared to death. I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to land?
Yeah, so that's where IFR, I follow roads, comes from.
Yeah.
And now, I've got students that don't want unless the airplane has GPS, they don't want to take it, and they're just going to be in the pattern. I'm like, you're going to be in the pattern. You're literally not going anywhere.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. We have one Roundel Caravan still that has a GPS stack. It's a non-G1000, and and the guys and girls do a nice job flying it. I mean, we fly. As you know, we're all weather capable, and it's definitely we do what's called end of days. They write end of day debriefs, so that we can know how did the operation work, how did things work out, and you can always tell on a bad weather day, the challenge that they had hand flying this airplane Roundels on, shooting and approaching a Lauderdale in a thunderstorm kind of thing. And they do a nice job, and so I think, it's important to, we're talking about going back to that, the basics of flying IFR. Mm-hmm. I think it's an important skill set,
So pilot skills, let's go there. Pilot skills are so critical, I think now more than ever, because we did have the pilot shortage and students and instructors and everyone rushing into the airline so quickly for the last, let's say, 4 to 5 years, right? And so we're in a lull right now. The great pause, has thrown the airlines into a tailspin. And we're hearing some great things. Like I've talked to local leadership, Vice President of American Airlines down here, and kind of what their trajectories are and how we're seeing like a U-shaped recovery. I have to imagine that that's, clearly affecting Tropic Ocean Airways, a number of flights going, but I've heard that charters have been less impacted. Cargo is actually doing pretty well.
Yeah. So there's been obviously a big shift towards private aviation because of the fear associated with traveling, commercial, and also because, a lot of the routes have been shut down because of the borders, right? Yeah. So private aviation doing well, like the Wheels Ups of the world, they're doing well. Where we're challenged is we fly international, right? So we are subject to the Bahamas government being shut down, which they're under quarantine and things like that. So most of the resorts are shut down. We're subject to the British Virgin Islands, and they're shut down. They just announced a couple of days ago they open December 1st. So that's been the impact for us. So we put ourselves in a pretty decent position to ride this out, and we are leaning forward because I do believe aviation is going to come back on a grand scale eventually. What's driving it right now to that push towards private aviation? I feel like companies like mine can capture it once the borders open. So there's an opportunity for us to scale up as people still want to fly private, because leisure travel is still, there's a huge demand for leisure. Like, so if you have a meeting in Milwaukee, right, you're not going to jump on an American Airlines flight and fly to Milwaukee for the day. You're probably going to Zoom call. Right. I think that has fundamentally changed business travel to a point, right? Yeah. Maybe it comes back to 80% of pre-COVID numbers. I don't think it'll ever be 100%, right? I think eventually we're all going to get Zoom fatigue, and then we're all going to want to start traveling again, but it might be down the road, right? Mm-hmm. But leisure travel, there's been a huge demand. We saw it in July when the Bahamas opened up. The Jamaican Minister of Tourism, I believe, coined the phrase Generation C. He said it's pan-generational. Doesn't matter how old you are, how young you are, how much money you have. You want to travel. You just want to feel safe when you travel, right? So what are the airlines, in order to capture that, they're going to have to create that air of safety, that perception of safety, right? Mm-hmm. We can debate these things all day long. We can debate whether or not COVID protocols are driven by politics, which some of them are, right? But we have to create this perception of safety for the flying public. One of the things we're not doing is heavily investing in rapid tests. Just in 2 weeks ago, I don't know if you saw this in Heathrow Airport, a 20-second test they're testing. Could you imagine checking in, getting. So if that gets FDA approval, for example, that'll bring back aviation a lot faster.
I agree. Right? Yeah, it's being able to check in there in the waiting lounge. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But for now, I mean, we're subject to the testing. We're subject to vaccine. So that's the unfortunate point we're in right now. So I wish I had a crystal ball. Yeah.
The uncertainty is the rough part, because I remember the Bahamas shut down, reopened, shut down, like
every day.
A yo-yo.
Yeah, every day. In fact, the PM would speak on Facebook Live, and we'd like all the leadership team, we'd all be like watching Facebook Live, like texting each other, like, what's he going to say, And then he would announce something. We'd put it out on social. We'd call all our clients and said, okay, here's the new rule, 5-day testing. Here's the COVID test that you could take, and it was a challenge. Like everybody worked really hard in July just to capture some of that, Yeah. So hopefully, some of these, I think PCR, which is the gold standard for swab tests, is hopefully going to become archaic because it takes too long to process, and that the new technology will, supplement that. So,
Yeah, you're right. I think testing is probably what's going to get there. And I've had these wonderful conversations with a maintenance guy at LAN who was telling me about the HEPA filters in large aircraft, how
Yep.
the air actually ventilates through and all this kind of stuff. He's like, if people are wearing masks in the aircraft, you really have nothing to worry about,
Yep.
uh, which is really interesting. But you're right. There's just like this generalized anxiety.
Yeah.
Even though we're on Zoom right now, the Zoom fatigue is real, right?
It
And
is.
that's why I think these are fun because it's not like, all right, let's sit through a Zoom meeting. It's
Yeah.
more fun.
That's a good conversation. Yeah. Anytime we talk about flying is a good day anyway. So,
That's
you
true.
know,
That's true.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
today was a beautiful day out there for those that got the chance to fly. But so we hope it's going to come back in this U-shaped recovery. From everything that I've heard is that we expect airlines to be at about 70% by the end of the year. And I've heard that some airlines are doing really well as far as that goes. Spirit
Yeah.
and
Spirit. I mean, look, yeah, they're not flying international, right? I mean, it's tremendous,
domestic
right?
flight.
Where you have United, which is heavy, heavy wide body international
All kinds,
struggling.
yeah.
Yeah.
And more difficult.
And you saw the news about Delta. Delta's pushing off their furloughs. I mean, some of it is, look, it's an election coming up and CARES Act, all this other stuff, right? So it's definitely a challenging time for our industry. And I think though, if I was a student pilot right now, I wouldn't stop.
No,
I
absolutely.
was just right. So it's funny, how many, I mean, you've been in this industry for a long time. Your family has, I'm old enough to remember 2 recessions, right? I was around September 11th. My friends who flew civilian with me before I joined the Navy were like, this is in August of 2001, mind you, don't go to the Navy. The airlines are hiring like crazy. You're giving up seniority. I'm like, screw that. I'm going to go fly fighters. And then those guys ended up getting furloughed, right? And they came back, obviously, and those guys are senior captains now. I mean, you're right. Dan Petrovich is a great example. I love his story where he tells about all the ups and downs.
Yeah, I think he
right?
just joined us, actually. Yeah.
Is Dan in there?
Yeah, I think hey, Dan.
What's up, Dan? Just singing your praises, man. Anyways, like he's got that great. Yeah. So we have people, older folks, thumbs up. So we have older folks who've come to work for us that this is their second career. And some of them, it was their first career until September 11th happened. And they said, oh, forget it. I'm going to go be an accountant, and then now they, come back. And that's why if I was young and there's always going to be the jobs out there, it's going to be a struggle. I think this industry is tough. I think if you're in this industry because you want to make $300,000 a year flying 10 days a month, you're in it for the wrong reasons. This has to be your passion, right? And if you find that passion, you start with that why, you'll ride this out.
I think if anything, this is going to shake out a lot of the people that were in it for a paycheck.
Yeah.
It's going to shake out a lot of them because those that have the passion for aviation really can't do anything else. Like, this is what you're meant to be doing, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it'll be rough for a little while, but there's a one consultant, Kit Darby, who put out an excellent chart. We've referred to it in previous interviews, but he has this really nice chart where the furloughs basically happen and then they kind of get reabsorbed into the system by end of next year. So those furlough pilots, according to this U-shaped recovery, get reabsorbed into the end of next year. And actually, so what caused the pilot shortage was retirements, right? There was more captains retiring than what we were making. And on top of the growing airline fleets, that's where the pilot shortage is coming from. And what has happened actually is retirements have accelerated, all right? American Airlines, they're accelerated. So when those furloughed pilots are reabsorbed, we're actually going to be in just as bad and maybe even worse of a pilot shortage, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see how things shake out. But
I think so. I mean, even if the airlines shrink, to your point, because of the early retirement offers and things like that, the workforce is shrunk, as well. So.
And so a student that's flying right now, somebody that's just starting or maybe finishing up their private, it's going to take the average student 1 to 2 years to get through their certificates. If they're going at a good pace. We have an accelerated 1-year program. So even then, that places you kind of towards when recovery is coming back in. And honestly, at 250 hours, most of our students go into 135s, towing banners, becoming flight instructors, putting in their dues. I think the idea of putting in your time, putting in your dues, doing that residency where you learn how to be a functioning commercial pilot kind of got lost in the last few years. I know plenty of people with 200, 300 hours that went right into a right seat at Avianca or Copa or wherever it might be. Yeah,
I think what I'm about to say is probably unpopular in some circles, but One good thing about COVID is that it wiped out the mentality of the 1,500 hours in a heartbeat. I think that's, to your point, it got rid of those guys and girls, you know. I think people who are in this industry now are in it for the right reasons who will stick with it. You know, so I think, you know, one of the challenges we saw right during the pilot shortage was the idea that, you know, I'm going to build my time quickly. I'm going to go off to the airlines without any, you know, to your point, paying dues. And paying dues doesn't mean having a horrible, you know, work-life balance, right? Paying dues simply means, to your point, you use the word residency, like a doctor, right? Like a doctor. It's an 8-year program to become a doctor, and you go through a residency after you graduate school. It's the same concept, you know, and that's part of, it's tough. You're working long hours and you're not making a lot of money, but you're building that experience level, that wisdom so you could become a professional in your job, you know? And I think we did lose sight of that for a while. You know, some people pay their dues in the military. Some people pay their dues in, you know, flying banners, to your point, or even coming to work for me. I don't think it's a bad place to work. You're flying celebrities around on a seaplane, you know, but the guys and girls work very hard. They do.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so it is paying dues in a way, you know, and
absolutely. And I have that conversation with a lot of instructors. It's like, you're on your plan A, you are a commercial pilot, you're getting paid to fly, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you want that extra zero on your paycheck, you got to put in your dues, you got to build that time experience, you know. We've got 6 airline partners right now, right? And everyone was clamoring to visit. It's gotten quiet right now, of course, but that demand is going to be there. And this is actually a perfect time to take questions, because I know that some of the questions I'm seeing popping up in the chat are just about this. So for those of you in the chat, those of you that are on Facebook, I'd love to know, one, where you're from, right? So let us know where you're from, what country you're from. I saw somebody here from Turkey, Virginia, India, Nigeria. Wow, we got a lot of people coming through.
Great.
Wow, yeah. A lot of local Moscow, Russia going on in here. And one of the first
Tribute. Fine.
Yeah, very nice. One of the first questions I see, of course, is, do career options look to be opening up in the next few years? Well, I think we already kind of touched on that. I think probably the domestic operators, cargo is strong right now. We've had quite a few people transition into cargo in this last year. And I think you can thank the Amazons of the world for the boost there. So cargo is going very strong. And like you mentioned, the 135 strong. Now you operate on a 135 capacity, right? Yeah,
we're 135 commuter actually. Yeah. So I agree with you. I think cargo's strong. I think private aviation, we talked about that, is strong. It's strong because of COVID, which is funny. And I think that trend's going to stay for a while. You know, there's perceived headwinds of, well, if I get an aviation now, in 5 years, everything's going to be automated. Like, I don't know anybody that's going to get on an airplane without a pilot. So I don't think that's realistic. So I do think that, you know, the jobs are going to be there in the future. So yeah, it's just right now it's a challenge, you know, because, you know, we talked about earlier, there's no testing, there's no vaccine, but that's going to happen. And when it does, people are going to start getting on airplanes again, and those jobs are going to be there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're in the right place, because we have a lot of students that come from Indonesia, and Indonesia is a chain of 1,000 islands, right? So you've got a very big seaplane airline out there also in the Maldives.
Yeah. And, Trans-Maldivian.
Yeah. And so you're kind of doing similar here amongst all these islands, the Caribbean, that are going on. So questions are starting to pop up here. Someone's asking if you would suggest getting a single engine seaplane before commercial, or waiting until you receive your commercial rating.
So you should get it after you receive your commercial, so you don't have to do that ride once, because you get the commercial seaplane ride, right? Yeah.
That makes sense. So what's the difference there between, and not having looked at the ACS, I've got my single engine seaplane, private. What's the big difference to the commercial?
You know, I can't answer that question because I'm so far removed from it. I apologize. I just remember, like, you know, that's how we looked at it, is you have to go back into a commercial ride on the seaplane if you already have.
Once.
Yeah, because you get your commercial single engine land, and then you have to get your commercial single engine sea. So if you already have your commercial, you get your commercial. When you get the seaplane rating, you get commercial single engine sea.
And I remember somebody telling me that they had a multi-engine seaplane rating, and I'm like, what can you even fly?
Trans-Maldivian, right? The Twin Otters. They have the Twin Otters. They have them up in Canada. Harbor Air, you know, big Canadian company, flies Twin Otters. Yeah.
All right. Someone's helping us out here. They're saying the commercial single engine ride is the same as a private. So. Yeah,
but you got to take it twice though. That's the key. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
One of the other questions we had here is, what skills should this person work on to be competitive in today's market?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, and again, this used to be unpopular when I used to say this all the time that, I've flown throughout my career. I've flown with thousands of good sticks, right? Like everyone I know is a good stick. Okay. Not everyone I know knows operations. Not everyone knows, I won't say his name, but he's on this call, came by my office and he showed me his resume where he's got a big background in marketing. I'm like, okay, that's impressive to me, So I think pilots right now should broaden their knowledge base, especially in this market, because where I might not be able to hire a pilot because of COVID, I might hire a marketing person who, by the way, can fly airplanes. And as soon as we start classes again, that person will class up with me, So I think, broadening the skill set and not just being aviation focused, but, understanding operations management, things like that. I mean, look, when you look at the major airlines, for example, most people in operations, fly the line, but they'll get an MBA and they'll get hired into a management role, right? And even there's a pilot that sits on the board at Delta, one of their pilots actually sits on their board, So I think you got to become more marketable right now, right? Yeah. By broadening your skill set. Again, I think gone are the days of 1,500 hours in a heartbeat. I think you just got to become more well-rounded,
That's it's a great way to put it. I always consider it like a double threat, right? So we have several people here that are AMPs or inspectors and ATP pilots, double threat. Like there's a ton of DC-3s flying out of Opelika. They require you to be a mechanic and a pilot, because if you break down, you got to fix it to get it back.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Right? I think to your point, it's a double threat. I love that. Whether it's the AMP side, which we have a few of those that fly, even our lead dispatcher is just finished his commercial, and he's going to start flying our line, and talk about a well-rounded guy. He's padding his resume. So whether he works for me or somebody in the future, he could go sit in almost any seat at a company.
And for this person's question, something we touched on earlier is a variety of your certificates. If what you've got is if you got your private, your instrument, and then your commercial, there's a ton of other people just like you. But if you throw in there a tail wheel rating, a seaplane rating, an aerobatic, that kind of stuff sticks out. It sticks out like, this is. And then when we're talking about resumes, like, the guy's got his tail wheel rating, that guy.
Yeah, what also helps too, and I'll just say, because I've done a lot of hiring. Have you taken any FAA safety courses? So here's a good question. I used to ask this question all the time, and our interviewers still ask this question. So hint, if you come apply here, you'll probably get this question in an interview. Tell me how you screwed up in an airplane, right? I've asked that question for years. And if somebody doesn't know how to debrief themselves, that's a skill set that you have to learn, right? You're not just going to be able to answer that question, right? It comes with time. And there's some great, operational risk management videos. There's courses you could take to really break down the lesson in a failure, right? I love to say that, people say, don't dwell on failure. I'm like, no. Dwell on failure until you find the lesson. And at that point you can move on, right? Apply that lesson. So that's what a debrief is. And we had a guy come in here one time, 400 hours. And we're like, hey, so tell us how you screwed up in an airplane. He's like, oh, I never screw up in an airplane. I'm like, well, I've got, 4,500 hours. I screw up every day. I must be really bad at my job, and then, so it's funny, like, to see that. So I think, understanding risk management is a skill set. CRM, like having a CRM course, like if you have that on your resume, to me, that's impressive. It means that you really care about, not just about stick flying, but about, you actually care about being a professional.
Yeah. And there's a lot of those courses. I mean, right now, there's a lot of those courses online at very low cost, if any.
Free.
FAA safety team, FAST, does a lot of stuff. And of course, if you're a pilot, you get discounts on insurance with that as well. One of the big things I'd say is how to prepare yourself right now is don't stop flying, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people have been furloughed or have finished their training. Don't just, sit on the sidelines or, go to your local airport, volunteer, show up at the flight school, hang out at the FBO. Eventually someone's going to let you into their plane, right?
Yeah. No, it's challenging right now because, so if you think about it, when I was in college, I waited tables. Well, there aren't that many jobs waiting tables right now. So how do you pay for flight school? To your point, you gotta figure it out. You gotta volunteer. You gotta find scholarships. I mean, I heard a great speaker last week who said, just like NASCAR, right? Like races aren't won in the pits. They're not won on the track. They're won in the pits. Yeah. And COVID, we're in the pits right now. So the harder you work now, the more you'll lap your competition, right? Sure. And it applies to the students right now. You just you got to work hard, figure it out, and get in front of where you should be right now.
Absolutely. So, yeah. Get yourself in there. Get yourself around aviation. Get current. two questions here. We're kind of running to the end of our hour. But we've got two questions. One is if you plan to introduce helicopters into your company.
Yeah, so it's funny. One of our pilots is a Marine Corps former Cobra pilot, and he always talks about helicopters. I love the idea of helicopters. We've talked about it because I do like the idea of short range aviation. That's our focus. You know, we're not flying jets. We're flying these short range, 250 miles or less. And I think helicopters is a logical next step for us to get involved in it. We just right now we don't have the bandwidth because we're in COVID, right? B, we're so focused on expanding amphibious operations that it would be a huge distraction. That being said, I'm not against it. I taught myself how to fly a helicopter on a simulator the other day. So I'm really excited about this right now. I'm flying a Huey around, with virtual reality. So yeah, I love the idea of helicopters. And to me, helicopters is a lot like seaplanes in terms of like its freedom. Sure. Like you go land in a parking lot, go land on a beach. It's kind of cool. Yeah. It's part of our atmosphere. So it's something that we've looked at. I just think it's probably 12 to 24 months out before we'd even consider it. So
I've always found it incredibly interesting. I've always wanted to do a little bit of rotor. I hear everything's backwards, right? Everything's backwards, and that's pretty jarring for people that already have those routes burned into their brain.
Yeah.
And so people ask the flight school as well if we'll ever do helo, and we've looked at it, dabbled with it 2 or 3 times, and the cost of an hour training wise on a helicopter is triple, right?
Yeah.
There's fewer helicopters. There's fewer helicopter instructors. There's many things that go around it. So I kind of feel like helicopters, if you're doing helicopters, you've got to be dedicated to helicopters.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's also something to be said for fleets standardization, right?
Yeah.
If one of your caravans goes out, you got 12 others, right? Let's fill the route in a different way.
Yeah.
So there's something nice about standardization.
It's definitely to your point. If you don't have the bandwidth, you shouldn't pursue it, But they are pretty cool. I mean, like talk about stick and rudder. It's like trying to walk and chew gum, right? Yeah. You're always on your toes on the rudder pedals, and I mean you can't just let go of the controls when you're learning how to fly a helicopter.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's true. It's one of those things that people truly love about aviation. For those of you on the line that haven't had a chance to go up for a discovery flight yet, I highly recommend it. But it's one of those things when you're flying, just like you said, you're fully engulfed, right? You're not thinking about this call you've got to make later or if you left the stove on or things like that, right? You're fully engulfed in what you're doing because there's so many things going on. And in helicopters, I feel like that just kind of kicks it up a notch.
Yeah. So flying, it's funny. Flying, I always called it my active meditation. I have a hard time. Like I can't sit in silence. I have to be doing something. Sure. And even, it's funny but when my dad passed away, we were very, very close. I was in Navy flight school. And I remember I came home here, probably got drunk for 10 days. And I went back to Kingsville, Texas. And my opso said, "What do you want to do, Rocco?" was my call sign. And I said, "Put me back in a jet." That's for me, that's my, and I was able to get in a jet, focus. And I ended up, finishing number 1 in my class because to me, that's my focus. That's my meditation. And flying has always been that way. Like, I don't care, I haven't flown in a long time and I miss it. That's why I'm looking at these warbirds, but I always, no matter what's going on here, right? When you feel the wheels come up and you feel that, as it's like the world goes away and you're just in a cockpit. And I think it's, to your point, like the more of those experiences you have, tail wheel, even trying helicopter, like it just builds this, it's a broader passion, if you will, for aviation. So
like I said, we're kind of getting to the end of our time, but we'll have a kind of a closing question here, and then we'll kind of kick it back to you. But this individual says he just got a single engine C and wants to, about 11 hours single engine C, and wants to know the best way to join Tropic.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So obviously we're not hiring right now because of the pandemic. That being said, we are looking, so we have a class on furlough. We're probably bringing some of those folks back to start class again in October. Right. And if all goes well, like we talked about the rapid testing and stuff, we'll probably have classes starting in Q1 of next year. And so if you go to the website, there's an application you fill out on the website. There's airline apps. We ask that you go in airline apps, and hint, we prioritize resumes with cover letters. Okay. So I'd rather, I don't like the generic, I'd like to apply to your airline. It's like, tell me a little bit about my company and why you want to work for us kind of thing on a cover letter. So I'm trying to give you guys some, and again, whether it's me or anybody else, I highly recommend you do that. And just apply. Like it's, like I said, it's a challenging time, but we're hoping to start hiring again in the spring. And hopefully you listen to some of the things I talked about in terms of the interview and how to make yourself more well-rounded. And hopefully you guys will take that on board and, and learn something.
I feel the similar question all the time. We always take resumes. We're always taking resumes. We hold on to them for 6 months if you're interested in being a flight instructor with us. Right now we're looking at CFI and II as a requirement. And you'll just keep flying, keep getting that next rating, your double I, your MEI, your tail wheel, all that. Because what's going to happen is that the people that had the 250-hour resume now, they're going to be competing against people with 700, 800-hour resumes, 1,000-hour resumes, right? So that's why you got to keep staying active. What I was saying before is go out to your local schools, flight schools, airports, volunteer. Join your your EAA chapter. Join AOPA, be out there, give rides to kids. If it keeps you active and it keeps the enthusiasm in aviation up, all that's gonna be more lines on your resume when the time comes.
Yeah, I agree. Show passion for it.
We're coming to the end of our hour. Any closing thoughts? Anything you want to tell us about Tropic Ocean or things that are on the horizon?
Yeah, no, look, like I said at the beginning of this call, I think, we have a great story and a successful story, but it's because we built a great team. And my opinion of a great team are people that actually are well-rounded to come together and work together, debrief together, call out each other for each other's fault. And I think, like, again, it's great that we have an opportunity to speak to young students here. That's something that sometimes is missing in civilian aviation, the ability to work across departments. So just take this on board as you go to your first flying job. You're a pilot flying an airplane. You're not the maintainer who's keeping that airplane flying for you. You're not the salesperson who's ensuring that revenue comes in to pay for that flight. So think about how to become more well-rounded and how you can provide value for the entire organization. I think that's important. And overall, look, stay with it. Aviation, it's a challenge right now. But as Dan will tell you, and the previous podcast, and me will tell you now, like, this industry goes up and down. But in my opinion, there's nothing else that's better to do in life than to be involved in aviation. So just stick with it.
Absolutely. You can find out more about Tropic Ocean Airways at flytropic.com. You can learn more about Wayman Aviation at wayman.net and follow us on all the platforms at Wayman Aviation. This video will be on YouTube and on our Facebook, and I hope that Tropic will share it as well, of course, once we've got it ready for you. Thank you so much for giving us your time this afternoon.
Eddie, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, it was great conversation. I always enjoy talking about the industry, so thanks.
I can't wait to hop on one of your caravans and head out.
Looking forward to it. You got it.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Right, yeah, you got it. Thanks, guys.
And thank you so much for all of our guests. If you're on Facebook, feel free to keep putting in questions. We'll keep answering them. And thank you so much for joining us, all right? Keep flying.